KCRW sponsors include A24, presenting Moonlight, a film chronicling 3 chapters in the life of a young black man discovering his identity and experiencing first love as he moves from childhood into manhood. In theaters now.
Hey, I'm Josh Barrow, your new host of Left, Right, and Center. Every week, join Rich Lowry, Bob Scheer, and me for a contentious yet civilized debate of the week's big political stories, from ISIS to the U.S. economy to this 47-candidate presidential election we're having. You can find Left, Right, and Center on KCRW's iTunes page.
From KCRW Santa Monica and KCRW.com, it's The Treatment. Welcome to The Treatment. I'm Elvis Mitchell. It's always a thrill to have my friend Oren Moverman here. We had him here for his last couple of films. He's here for The Messenger and Rampart, and he tends to make films about people who aren't rooted. And his newest film couldn't be more about somebody who is rootless. It's the film Time Out of Mind. First, Oren, welcome back.
Oh, great being here.
And the star of his film, the well-spoken.
Can we do that again?
No, we can't do that again. No, you can't. No retakes in radio. And the star of
he's on medication. There are reasons for this. For everything, there's reasons.
And the man outing Oren's medication is Richard Gere, who's the star of Time Out. First of all, Richard, thanks so much for being here.
We did an interview about 3 years ago, which was fun. So I'm happy to do it again.
It was good to have you. And it's really great because one of the things that I think about so much for Oren as a filmmaker is he's really interested in sort of the way the world deals with masculinity and power. And this is a film about a man who's lost power and trying to hang on to it in some way, isn't it?
Well, he's lost all sense of self. And frankly, at one point says, I'm invisible. We're not even here. You know, and I think that's even he wouldn't be able to articulate that, but I think it's worse than that. He's actually a black hole that people are afraid to come near. So this loss of identity, loss of social structure, loss of all connections. We see a guy when the movie begins, we see him with the very last connection has been broken. And what does someone do when there's nothing to hold you up anymore?
And I want to talk about this a little bit because, again, this idea for you, we look at Rampart and The Messenger. These are also films about people who are trying to find roots for themselves. And I kind of wonder where that comes from for you in the way you tell these stories, because it's kind of key thematically for you, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And, you know, I try to work it out with a shrink every week, but I think rootlessness, rootlessness is the right word. I mean, I think that probably describes me as an immigrant and as someone who is living in a society he wasn't born in. But I think that the other thing you mentioned, masculinity, for whatever reason, the breakdown of the theater of masculinity is a theme in these movies. And I do think of them now as a trilogy just because there are 3 of them, so it's convenient. But I also think that you see a progression from one to the other. Men in male-dominated institutions, military, police, and a male homeless shelter, kind of thrown into chaos and unable to figure out their emotions and how do they proceed from there. And then what is the role of compassion in sort of finding a way for them?
Well, Richard, what was your first conversation with Oren like about the film? Well,
it's something that I'd had quite some time, so I've been thinking about it for quite a while. And we became friends on I'm Not There, which Oren co-wrote. It took me many years to begin to articulate what I wanted to do with this script that I had bought. And I knew it was going to be in the neo-realist world. And to do that, you have to be really vigilant about reality and moment-to-moment realities when you're telling those stories. You can't have any bumps in there because it just destroys all believability. And it's a delicate thing to do because it's not operatic. It's deep and it's meaningful and it's emotional, but it's not operatic the way most things are now. Quick opera, quick explosions. And so when I told him I had this script, we just ran into each other at a new members of the Academy event. And he was a new member. I couldn't imagine why he should have been there a long time ago. So we started talking, what are you doing? What am I doing? Well, I have this character in the script that I've been thinking about. And it's Oren said, well, let me read it. So he read it, and he knew exactly what I was talking about. There was a book written by a homeless guy named Cadillac Man, and it was in the land of lost souls. And he was not a writer, but he was brilliant. and just describing his moment-to-moment reality on the streets. And I knew this was exactly the way to make the movie, and gave it to Oren. That was the beginning point of us discussing on where to go with this, not just the character, but the style of the story, very matter-of-fact, Bressonian, straightforward. Let process be the character in this. Let's see what happens. What happens when a guy has lost his last home and has to fend for himself? And we took it from there and did our research. You know, I had been in the shelters before. In fact, I was an inspector for the Coalition for the Homeless. So it was fun for me taking him to these haunts that I knew, and many of them I hadn't been in for many years. So I was rediscovering them myself with Oren in process of thinking about this movie. But I think it was, in fact, the looking at Bellevue or looking at the other major shelters in New York that the movie started to take on its real life, and I could see Oren's mind fire up. And when he wrote, finally sat down, I think it happened very quickly. It just came right out of him, and this is that movie that he wrote.
Yeah, in many ways, the research became the movie. Richard took me to homeless shelters and walking around talking to people on all sides of the issue, to clients, to guards, to administrators, Coalition for the Homeless. We just started hearing things over and over again that sort of joined into a narrative that wasn't going to be a conventional story. It was going to be the process, an experiential kind of approach to walking in his shoes, observing him.
Well, one of the things I found so interesting about the movie, Richard, is that so often you play guys who we're aware of their control. We're aware of their awareness of a situation. And to play a guy who has that kind of stuff stripped away from him must have been the sort of challenge that you were really warming yourself up for.
Well, there was things that I discovered, obviously, when we were shooting that I wasn't so sure. In fact, I didn't focus on it, but I realized that this guy's not angry. He's frustrated moment by moment when things come up, the same way we all would, but he doesn't act out. He's not an angry person. And that surprised me. I thought there'd be more of that would come out in the process of this film, but it wasn't there. And I remember the first cut. We've talked about this before, but the first cut that Oren wanted to show me, I had this sense that there was something monk-like about this guy. And he's on an interior voyage that's rich. He's living with his mind and working on his mind. And he's kind of aware, he can't articulate it, but he's kind of aware of his dilemma. And in a peasant way of explaining it, finally he does with Dixon in this, of saying that basically it's all absurd, we're clowns. By extension, everyone's a clown. Everyone is living on the surface of reality. And again, this is not articulated in the movie, but I think it's in the fabric of who this guy is in some way.
But I just found it interesting because your posture, your physical posture is even different in this film. Because so often one way or another, filmmakers give you entrances.
Yeah. No, this is not a power guy. This is not a guy with a suit. You know, there's no Armani suit on this guy. He's the total opposite. And he never walks into a room thinking anyone is going to look at him. In fact, he doesn't want anyone to look at him. He doesn't want power. It's not, I think that's part of this monk-like thing I'm saying him. This is not someone that needs to be top sergeant or president of the United States or have people underneath him. He lives in his mind. He lives by his wits. He lived by his looks probably until that started to fail him, which he talks about in the movie. He still has some sense that he's not a problem guy. He's clean. If that nurse would take him in, you know, it wouldn't be a problem. He'd be a good person to have in the house. And there's a certain pride in presenting himself that way. And he's rejected. And I think there's a certain sweetness in that. We see him rejected quite a bit. And again, he doesn't act out in the process of rejection. He's able to process that. The only thing we see him do actively is start to deteriorate mentally. And I think we do that pretty subtly. He really does make a descent, and much of the movie may just be happening in his mind.
That's interesting because I almost found, by the way, it's the treatment. I'm talking to Richard Gere, the star of Time Out of Mind, and the filmmaker Oren Moverman. I almost found myself wondering if there's almost dual realities, the reality that he thinks he's living in and what's actually happening around him. I kind of felt that sort of schism, these two things at war. Is that something?
Absolutely. And the movie is designed that way. I mean, the way it's shot, the layers all around reality in the movie, the shooting through glass, shooting from with obstructions.
But it's the way he would let accidents happen, too, is that people sometimes, very long takes, obviously. He's shooting digital on these long lenses and beautiful. But we never knew, we didn't block these things out. This was very spontaneous and intuitive from the camera side, from the actor's side. We just kind of flowed with it. And sometimes the compositions would be wonky. And it's not like the camera was on a dolly and we could shift to, if someone went behind a tree, they were lost. And that happens a lot in this. Someone walked away from a window and I'm talking to nobody.
Yeah. And
which leads to this idea that maybe there's nobody there anyhow.
Right. It's also, it's a dual reality in the movie itself, and Richard could probably speak about dual reality in philosophy, but it's also a dual reality that we created in the making of it, because we took an actor portraying a character who's based on some very real people and put him in a movie inside live environments that are happening in quote-unquote reality. So we already started clashing these two layers of existence, and not to get too meta about it, but I think that we always felt that there were two things happening at the same time. We were watching a guy being ignored at Astor Place, panhandling, everybody walking by him. It's Richard Gere. And we're watching it from a Starbucks, where the camera is placed. Everyone's ignoring him. We're happy. We're getting a movie made. The concept works. He's in live environments. 10 minutes into it, we're devastated. We're watching a homeless man being ignored.
I just found myself thinking, because that kind of duality we're talking about, sort of presentational versus who you actually are, has also been a part of the way you made movies anyway. I mean, you that's kind of a key character thing for you, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that there's, in talking, I always mention the word theater when I talk to you for some reason, but I think there's a theatricality to the role we play, no matter who we are, and I think that maybe by the way I grew up, I've always been suspicious of the way things are presented to me, and I've always looked for ulterior motives or other facades or the truth inside a presentation. I think this movie, touches me so deeply because it does feel like it blows it wide open. I think the monk-like character that Richard is talking about is really such a presence in the movie that is dealing with existence in its most basic form: food, shelter, warmth, love, all the basic things, that I think this one kind of brought it all home for me, because it was just there. There was no hiding anything. It was just such basic human existence being challenged with every step. And that is why I'm quitting filmmaking.
You were saying, Bresson.
Not before you finish that script.
Or this conversation, thank you. But you were saying, Bresson, I found myself thinking about both Pickpocket and The Man Escaped when I was watching this. That scrambling to keep
Which
your
is funny.
footing.
We talked about Pickpocket in the very beginning, just as we were throwing out references of possibility. And the Pickpocket always had interested me because it was actually Schrader that turned me on to the Pickpocket.
Sure, that's kind of the center of it. Yeah.
Very much Gigolo came from
Pickpocket.
that.
Yeah.
And which came from the Dostoevsky. And but it's about process. How do you pick a pocket? Is very much what is that film. The Man Escaped. Which is, he gave me, I had never seen that before, and we looked at that. And again, it's a process. How do you escape? It's about process.
We're going to take a break and talk about my guest, Oren Moverman's imminent retirement. But before that, we're talking about the film Time Out of Mind with Warren and the star Richard Gere's The Treatment. There's more to come. Stay with us.
Are you thinking about buying a new car? Consider donating your old one to KCRW and support the unique mix of news, music, and culture you love. You'll become a KCRW member and get a nice tax write-off. For details, visit kcrw.com/cars.
Welcome back. It's The Treatment. Oren's still here. He hasn't gone anywhere yet. Oren Moverman, whose new film is director, is Time Out of Mind. Richard Gere, who stars in the film, is also here. And you talked about that thing with the voices. What I found interesting about that was that almost becomes, for me, wondering if that's where inside his psyche, if in fact these people are really there or not. And that kind of sense of what he's trying to combat versus what the city looks like to everybody else. Was that part of what you used to play the character to some extent, Richard?
Yeah, I mean, we a lot of this, Oren's really smart, and a lot of this he knew in advance what he was doing. A lot of this we kind of figured out as we were shooting it, and we were very much on the same wavelength. So it actually happened quickly and easily for us in shooting this. It had to.
How much time do you guys have to prepare? Because you said there wasn't much money. How much rehearsal time and just going out and shooting and
didn't rehearse.
There's no rehearsal.
I don't like to rehearse. He doesn't. That's.
I've yet to rehearse for a film.
But we talk. We talk about things. We talk about what we're having for lunch. We talk about what did you see last night. No, but that's part of it too.
Yeah.
Is just hanging. I find hanging time is really important with people you're working with, and you end up talking about the movie anyhow. But those kind of focused things there were some things that we had ideas for a new scene or something occurred to us. I don't want to give anything away, but there's some stuff in the movie that came up, big stuff, that just came up like a day or two before we ended up doing it. So we were open to the surprises and what would occur to us. I think that the idea that perhaps Dixon is totally in my imagination certainly came from Oren. I was intrigued by that, and we played with that.
And we should say the Dixon character is
the Ben
Vereen
character, who's the veteran homeless guy. He's a veteran in terms of just being on the streets for a long time. And he's the guy
he's presented as the jazz man, right? The jazz man.
Right.
And we found a way to make sense of that in terms of my character.
But that manifestation, if I can say that, is almost this thing that he needs rather than something that actually exists.
Yeah.
Because clearly the way that Dixon's paying attention to you, you kind of think, well, is this real anyway? Because he actually sees you in a way that nobody else does.
Well, a lot of the interaction between us, I'm not looking at him, and I'm not really engaging with him jabbering away at me. He's one of those voices. At the same time, we're all just voices jabbering away on some level anyhow.
Oh, that's what people listen to this show. There's nothing but voices jabbering away here. But I think for me that's so interesting because, again, going back to what you do, Oren, is so often these movies are about people looking to join tribes, people who are in effect kind of outcasts, and to start with somebody who's that person, and it's generally the movies we've seen of yours, be them films you've written or films you've directed, that person is offered a point of entry back into this tribe from which he's been thrown out of. Did you start with that as an idea here to make it that different from the other things you've done?
No, we didn't start there, but we definitely ended there. There was, I think the first version of the script ended slightly differently, but that slight change was huge. Going through the process of watching George, the character, from the first day he has nowhere else to go. He's exhausted all his options through homelessness on the street, homeless shelter, through trying to reconnect with his daughter. Really presented all the problems and all the questions, but then we started talking about the solutions, and not in a big social, like change the world way, but the solutions on an intimate level for a human being. How do you re-enter society, not just on a bureaucratic level, but on an emotional, human level? And the daughter was the key to that. The daughter was going to be his re-entry into possibility of rebuilding his life, and it's not that, romantic. It's on a very small level. And the end of the movie, which I shouldn't talk about, but it was slightly different. It was less optimistic. I think we ended up with an ending that gives you hope about exactly what you're saying: tribe, connection, family, community, society, whatever it is that's going to help people who are in distress, who are homeless, who are sort of the underclass and the ones who are being ignored, is going to be by a collective kind of getting together and trying to address it. And that could be on a small level of family or on a much larger level where it should be on a social level and an activist level.
Well, one of the things I mentioned to you, I don't know if you remember this, Richard, when I saw you last year after the film screened in Toronto, was it really hit me after it was over what a devastating story this was, because it's really is, going back to Bresson, this guy who's just kind of, it's all about moment to moment. I mean, there is nothing like a through line in this in conventional terms, and that haunts me as we still talk about this. And I just wonder how hard it was for you to get in and out of that. I mean, because it's really an emotionally demanding piece of work.
Yeah, it was, but I can't say it was difficult. And people ask me that kind of thing a lot about this. Frankly, maybe it's just because I've been around this so much. I felt I knew this guy I had developed this. It was important to me. But I think I didn't approach this the way I would a normal character. I didn't care about the backstory. And
But because we don't get any.
Why? Because we didn't care. It was in the first script, the one I bought, and it was one of the things I didn't like about it. I'm not interested. And I don't think that tells you anything. It gives you a crutch to think you understand someone because you know their history, their story. And it's something to hold on to, but it's not really what's there. I was looking for something deeper than that. And I was looking for something, I called it before, the mystery. And that's all I wanted out of this. And I'm not going to get the mystery by the normal acting route. I have to just be open in the moment. And if he and I are working well together and trust each other, the mystery somehow will emerge. And I was just working totally intuitively on this. And I was in and out. Look, I'm producing the movie. I'm making rational adult decisions. And then I'm playing George. And I wasn't having a problem with that. We were highly motivated and incredibly generous in where we were coming from in making this movie, which also makes that easier. The ability to come in and out of different planes of necessity and reality.
But those goals that your characters often have, to strip that away and just really make, because you said, Bresson, I can't help thinking about those movies, especially in Man Escape, which really is about just survival. Mm-hmm. I mean, everything's happening in that moment, and it doesn't matter what happened the beat before. Was that something that appealed to you about doing this, to try to throw away the sort of conflicts that you often use?
Yeah, absolutely, because it's the ultimate goal. It's the most realistic goal. It's the goal that's truest to life.
But if there's a misstep in this, though, suddenly this becomes an exercise, you know?
Yeah.
And we're watching it. That, to me, feels like a danger.
A movie like this looks like it's easy, right? It
doesn't look like it's easy at all to me.
But I think people would look at this and they'd say, well, yeah, I mean, probably Richard killed himself doing this to be this very dark character, you know, which he's not. I don't think he's a dark character at all, but brooding. He's not even brooding. If you really look at it, you know, the guy's a decent person who obviously made mistakes, and he went down the rabbit hole and things happened and his life fell apart. We give the story 3/4 of the way through. We give the outline of the story. It's not an extraordinary story. We understand it. We've been through it. Friends of ours have been through it. Family members have been through it. We know this story. But what we were doing is something that's incredibly delicate. That's what we were trying to do. And I think we were very aware that if we messed up somewhere in that fabric of delicacy that we were trying to do, the film wouldn't work at all. If we broke the trust of an audience watching that delicacy, we couldn't get it back. So it was extremely difficult.
The key to that, I think, was also deciding very early on that there were not going to be any bad guys in this movie.
That's true.
That this is not about good guys and bad guys.
That took the opera out of it.
You're not taking sides. Everyone has their reasons. In fact, in the script, every time a character was introduced, it said they have their reasons to explain whatever they're doing in that moment. Everyone has a story. Everyone is dealing with a great battle that they're fighting in their lives. Everyone's busy. Everyone's running narratives through their phones and emails and texts. And so we almost felt like all these narratives existed around us. We didn't need the one classic narrative to tell that story. We really could make a movie about process, moment to moment, stripping away that end goal of kind of arriving at a place of great power was diffused. And every second felt like a moment of great importance for us. And what the hope was that if you collect all these moments and you put them in some sort of shape, that they'll add up to an experience that opens up possibilities for you as a viewer. And so it's much more engaging, trying to engage the viewer and make them an active part of the movie and asking the questions than actually supplying answers.
It's the treatment. We're talking about jabbering with our old friend Oren Moverman, the director of Time Out of Mind, and the film star Richard Gere. But I think, though, that idea of not doing the thing we might expect in a movie like this by making it doing a lot of sort of jerky handheld sort of stuff, but by giving this kind of interesting formalism, I mean, it does feel – I was thinking about the Ouija photographs as I was looking at it, where we just kind of happen upon something and we have to make our own decisions about it, and having people come in and out of the frame discomforts people in a really subtle way, doesn't it? That idea of having it be this rigid frame all the time.
Yeah, it could, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I think it's
well, it makes it feel too that it wasn't set up. I mean, frankly, the movies that we've seen that tried to work in this way before, first of all, they cost way too much money, and you see the money. You see that this was a set-up scene with the traditional, medium shot, overs, close-ups, and you know that it was done, it was constructed. I didn't want anything about this movie feel like it had been manufactured. I wanted the whole thing to feel like it was something that you kicked and you looked down and there was an object there, a piece of wood or an interesting stone that you picked up. But you found it, and it was beautiful. But you found it, not because someone made it and put it in your hand.
What I think is weird about it, and it hit me after I saw it that first time, is that there's no real climax in it. But there's the tension of waiting for that thing. You're waiting for that thing that explains what you've just seen, and it doesn't happen.
There isn't a way. There isn't a way, but it's subtle. I mean, this is not a kind of movie that gives you that on a platter with a fork and a knife, and he said, "There it is, eat it."
But
But the stuff that happens in the last few scenes, those are monumental. What happens in the Coalition for the Homeless is monumental for this man. What happens in the bar when he presents what he does to his daughter, that's monumental. And it's simple, but I think it works on a simple reality level, but it works on a metaphysical level as well.
But that's one of the things that you do so often, or is that idea of saying that there is a social net, there is infrastructure, there is this kind of thing that exists that it's not terrifying at all. And if you are open to it, there's something welcoming about it.
Absolutely, yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say, you know me well enough, Elvis, to know that, and we talked about this, Richard and I, that when we make a movie, we also make it in conversation with something, and in conversation with something that is happening, in as film lovers and as cinephiles and all those good words, we know what the language that's prevailing is doing right now. And right now, I think this movie was done on a certain level, most of it conscious, but some of it not, in conversation with what television is doing and in the way television is telling stories and questioning, on a larger level, what is cinema, what are the possibilities of filmmaking right now, and is the language that we're all kind of getting used to in watching serial television and television movies or short things on the internet, is that changing the way we can make movies? Can we go beyond narrative? Can we go beyond all these climaxes and all these classical things or all these expectations that are now in people's DNA from binge watching all these shows, and kind of create a language that actually has applications in social issues? It's a tall order, but I think it's a dialogue worth having.
Is that one of the things you like about this, Richard? That was one of these things where you realize that the clock is running and the movie's eating up stories that goes along, that it felt in its way a response to that kind of constant sort of appetite for narrative that we see in movies so much these days?
Well, as I said, the original script that I bought many, many, many years ago was a traditional, could have been a movie, a bad version of it would have been a movie of the week. And with a resolution. There was a court case in it, he defended himself, he won but sort of won, and they paid off with $1 and blah, blah. It was all, it was, so I had no interest in that. This story,
But you liked the bones of it, though. You liked what?
I liked the mystery.
Okay.
And it had nothing to do with plot. I wanted to see what was, the metaphor I use is Miles Davis all the time. Miles said, I play the notes that aren't there. I wanted this movie to be about the notes that aren't there, the words that aren't there, the thoughts that aren't there, the visions and dreams that aren't there. I want the movie itself to be invisible.
That's a great way to put it. We're out of time. I can't thank you guys enough. Richard, thank you so much for doing this.
Thanks.
Ending on Miles Davis. Now we really want to see the movie. Oren, thanks again for coming back.
Thank you.
My guests are the people behind Time Out of Mind, the filmmaker Oren Moverman and the star Richard Gere. Recording engineer NPR West is Theo Mondo. The show is mixed by Kat Yor. It's edited by Blake Veit, who's also associate producer. I'm Elvis Mitchell. It's The Treatment. To catch up on past episodes of The Treatment, go to KCRW.com or listen on your smartphone with KCRW's mobile apps, or subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to podcasts. The Treatment is produced and distributed by KCRW Santa Monica.